Hi, everyone. Welcome to All the Forbidden Things, where we talk about things that we're probably not talking about, including with people that we are close to in our lives. Today's episode is actually going to be not necessarily religion. Well, we can talk about whether it's classified as that, but we're going to be talking about paganism. Armando is our guest. He is a pagan priest, and we only just met. So this will be an episode between two people that don't know each other well, and we'll learn a lot about what our first impressions would be based on, certainly mine, based on things that I have been taught or picked up about paganism along the way. So I usually start by coming up with a fun get to know you question. So ours can literally be, what is your favorite? What do you think my favorite color is?
For you, I would imagine a shade of red, perhaps a darker red.
Yeah, someone else guessed the same thing. Maybe it's because you're in my home and there's a lot of red going on.
A
but
little bit.
but it's definitely like a dark burgundy-ish red.
Mhm.
Okay. So what I think your favorite color is, I think it's probably in the greens.
For me, it's not necessarily the particular color. I like the darker colors, but definitely a dark woodsy green.
Yeah.
Definitely. Or a dark woodsy, or not woodsy, but a dark red.
Hmm. All right. Well, we're going to dive straight into it.
All right.
So, the first question is you wanted to ask me to define paganism. What do I think paganism is?
Yeah, so before I go on and talk about paganism, what is your perceptions of it and what experiences might you have had with it?
So, when I was growing up, I was always taught about like the occult,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that's the same thing. I have in my adult life and very recently here in Savannah come across a couple um, stores that have pagan stuff, and kind of witchcraft stuff. In one of them, there was like a kind of a workshop about hexes.
Hmm.
And so then I learned that people have relationships with different entities, and that's kind of how there's like basically pagan gods or pagan entities.
Hmm.
Um, I think originally I would have taken a stab in the dark that it was almost like atheism. Um, but I think I did learn from you earlier when we were talking that witchcraft is a part of paganism. They're not exactly the same thing. But yeah, I really just have this general sense of other spirits or other things that are kind of in the
Hmm.
mix.
So there's three areas that somewhat commingle, and some people are more into one aspect or another. There's paganism, which is belief in the old belief systems, the old spiritualities before the coming of Christianity. So things like, for me, a tie-in is the Roman ancestry with me and the Roman gods.
Mm.
Celtic's a very popular one as well. But paganism itself is the belief and connection with the older religious ways of life.
Mm.
There's also witchcraft, which is spell work, and you'll see the two sometimes intermingle in some groups and sometimes not at all. A pagan might or might not be a witch. A witch might or might not be a pagan. That mostly revolves around energy working and spell working. And then the third area that some people dabble in is New Age. New Age has a lot to do with correspondence. So when you go to one of the stores, they'll say that this rock has this, and this properties, or this herb has this, and this. That's very New Age. So that's a very more modern concept. Um, so with people in the community, they take one of the various aspects and they might bring in the others to it, but they usually come from one of the three basic backgrounds.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's interesting to me because before, this reminds me, when I went to that place, I realized that there were, these like ancient gods and ancient, like older, like sort of, do you call them faiths or religions, those
You
gods?
can.
Okay.
For me, one of the things that helps is defining a religion versus a spirituality.
Okay.
So a religion is an institute of humans. So like a church or a tradition or things like that. It's a group of humans that all follow the same path and the same beliefs and all that. And then there's spirituality, which is the more inner component for oneself with that kind of thing.
Got it. Okay.
So a lot of paganism is tied with spirituality. There's not a lot of religious community to it, just because we don't have big pagan churches sitting anywhere.
Okay. Is there a reason for that?
So our greatest strength and our greatest weakness is the same thing in the community, and that's diversity. In studying paganism, you get to learn the innermost aspects of yourself with that frequently. And so what is important to me and what speaks to me can be completely different than you. Also, since paganism deals with pre-Christian cultures and their belief systems throughout the entire world and ages, it can be vastly different ceremonies and belief systems.
Okay, so one of the so that was an interesting thing that I didn't know. Another thing that I didn't know was that New Age, which so I didn't know that fell under paganism. And does that include people who are like part of astrology or?
It certainly can be. That's a very new agey aspect to it. And again, like witchcraft, there are people that are new age that aren't necessarily pagan. And there's people that are pagan like me that don't really get into the new age aspect of it.
Well, then what makes it pagan? What's the thing that makes something pagan or not?
Tying back into one of the old cultures or one of the old religions.
Okay, so if I was really into, I like tarot. I don't actually know how to read it well, but I just play with it.
Takes practice.
Yeah. But if I'm messing around with that and I'm like pulling cards and being like, like trying to have a relationship with the deck a little bit and almost enjoying the awkwardness of the communication and learning about it, I'm not engaging in paganism because that is not an ancient practice.
Right.
Okay.
And it's somewhat historic, but yes, that is a very new age thing.
Okay.
If you were getting into like researching the Celts and what the Celtic religious systems were beforehand, that would be more paganism.
Okay. So New Age is not under the umbrella of paganism?
Correct. Although many of the people that do engage in one engage in another.
Okay.
So they're often intermixed, but they don't necessarily have to be.
Okay. Yeah, that's crazy. I always thought of paganism as like, I don't know. I didn't think it was the ancient spirituality. Wow. Okay. So even after talking with you, learning about it a little bit and all of this whole time. Okay. So then I have a question for you.
I would hope so.
What do you think my fears and apprehensions around paganism are?
So often in America, so much of what we think is influenced by what we see in the media and what we hear in the people around us. So with that, paganism and magic in general make great storytelling, and they make great villains in a lot of things. In addition, a lot of people's faiths are against such things, even if they don't have a context and backing as to why. And so, for a lot of people, the fears and ties into it come from a background of being exposed to things that make great storytelling but have no basis in reality whatsoever. So, a lot of times, social components on it are very much a worry for people. If they're interested in it, what will people think? If I'm doing tarot, does that make me a bad person? Is God going to hate me? That sort of thing. And that's a different journey for each person to take and come to terms with. But generally, like most things in life, if you find out what's true to you and stand your ground on it, societal norms will adapt around you.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. That could be a whole episode. So my fears around it actually come. Okay, also clarification question.
Mhm.
The occult,
Mhm.
is that the same thing? And what is that referring to?
So the occult's a big umbrella term that kind of deals with everything spooky and supernatural. It doesn't really have a terminology, and inside the communities, it's not really a word that's used very much. It's very much a media kind of thing
Okay.
for everything from witchcraft to new age to anything that's spooky and Halloweenish.
Got it. Okay. And then in those like movies where people are like summoning spirits and things like that,
Mhm.
is that related to paganism or any of these things that we've been talking about?
So there's a lot of traditions that do commune with spirits like that, and some sources do better at portraying that than others. A lot of it ties into ancestral grounds. What a lot of pagans like myself do is work with ancestral spirits. They try and connect with people from their past, from their lineage, or people from their own history that might have departed. And so a lot of times the connection is with that. There's also a lot of people have faith in spirits of one's environment. So here in Savannah, where we're at, there's a lot of swampland, and so there's a lot of connecting with swamp kind of nature and the spirits that might embody that as well.
Would that fall under kind of almost like animism, the swamp part?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's exactly what that would fall under, is animism,
Okay.
which is the belief that everything in the world around us has its own spirit and life.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the scientific definition of life, it has its own energy that flows throughout the universe.
Okay. Now this is I don't know why it's so important to me to classify it, but I think that it does kind of help people understand it better.
Mhm.
So when you talk about like the spirit work, and does that fall under paganism or does that fall under a branch of spirituality that is part of your experience?
It could fall under either, actually. There are some traditions and some ancient cultures that deal with that. But really, when you come to a practice, you're coming to what speaks to you as an individual. And so we have different classifications, but inevitably, it all gets muddled into what's the path for you? What is the connection for you? So if you can come at it as a basis of, I'm looking into this culture and this culture has a tradition associated with that, then it can be very pagan. But that, even if you're not working in one of those cultures, doesn't mean you can't engage in something like that.
Got it. Okay. I think one of the reasons that I have had fears in the past is because of, yeah, media, but also because my parents, I mean, there was a lot of like fear around like, oh my God, this stone has something in it that we got from someone else. And
Mhm.
like the almost, I think there was almost this, and this was something we had talked about, wanting to talk about, but kind of growing up in a Christian faith and this almost blurring of the lines of like demonic with pagan or with the occult or that, but like my mom specifically had these crystals and her perception was and potentially still is that that sort of, yeah, there's something satanic or demonic going on, or that there's something rather than that it has a life of its own or something like
Mhm.
that.
So we were talking about animism before, the thought that everything has a spirit and a soul. Um, when we talk about doing magic, a lot of times the concept is taking that energy and changing it. And we do that through thoughts and we do that through energy work. So a lot of times what happens is someone has a belief about something and they're projecting that onto it and they start to change it to how they view things to be. So something like a rock that might not possess any particular attributes like that whatsoever, if someone's focusing on that long enough and has that association with it long enough, for them that becomes a very real aspect of it for them.
So they're actually programming the object with energy that could almost have a life of its own and become frightening to them.
Exactly.
Wow. So are
And
we kind of creating life?
in a way, you can view it as creating life. You can also view it as altering life. It also is a way that we deal with people around us and associations. If you see someone time and time again, and every time you see them, you associate them with this thing that they did or this attribute that you impose on them, you'll build up into your head where this person becomes the manifestation of whatever it is.
Oh, is that like an egregore? Is that what that's called? Do you
Mm-hmm.
know? Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if someone did your friend wrong, that you were at school and every time you saw them, you thought about what a jerk they were to your friend and all that, in your brain, you're building them up to be this horrendous person. And so in your mind, whenever you see them, is going to come out all these associations and all these feelings and all these emotions. We can do the same thing with, like you're saying, a rock or anything like that. If it has that associations and we build up that association for our perception of the world, by all means, it does take on those attributes.
But the person doesn't change.
Right.
In real life, it is our experience of them
Mm-hmm.
that changes. I've thought about this kind of in relationships before, where the relationship is almost an egregore, where it has a life of its own and each person's kind of programming it in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But also the person that you're across from, the person that you're dating or whatever. You know how sometimes people will have the experience of like they were like, oh, this was this perfect person and I was so in love with them and all of this, and you experience them this way, and then you find out maybe their true self or something they've done, and then it completely alters your perception. But it felt so real what was before and this perception you have of them,
Mm-hmm.
in a way in which it feels like you're interacting with actual energy.
Exactly. And by building up those associations, we can actually change the environment around us. So, for example, if you are building that with someone, it's going to change the way that you treat them when you interact with them. And so it's going to make that relationship go in a completely different direction than it ever would have before. So we can build someone up to be the pinnacle boyfriend, girlfriend, or jerk, or whatever association you have. And by continually putting that thought and energy into it, you end up building a relationship where oftentimes they end up manifesting exactly what you expected them to be.
Yeah.
And then that lets you go, see, I told you that person is this way. That's because you made the relationship with them that way.
Yeah. Well, then you think about how much are we able to alter reality beyond ourselves? Is that something? Because, for example, and this is the sort of the subject of the responsibility
Mhm.
aspect. Because I know some people, and one of the fears that a lot of people have, and not so much me, but is like, oh, I'm going to get hexed, or that person's going to make me sick, or there's going to be some effect on my life or experience that they're going to do to me. So, I guess I'm interested in how much do you actually really sort of change, or do we, knowingly or not, change reality and
Mhm.
change the world? And then what's the responsibility associated with that?
So the responsibility associated with it's a very individualized journey with that. Um, Everybody has their own ethical path, but yes, you can absolutely alter things in that way.
So, for example, people think of someone that practices voodoo,
Hmm.
and they will often stay away from that person because they don't want to piss them off.
Right. So a lot of it comes down to the fundamental power of belief, which is what fuels things. So if you innately don't have a belief that something's going to work on you, it's going to have a very hard time having any effect on you whatsoever because it's not making that change within you. So a lot of times putting on a hex or putting on a curse or something of the more offensive versus defensive nature like that comes with having them believe in that sort of thing.
Oh, so you couldn't do anything to me that didn't buy into.
Right.
Okay.
And so, for a lot of the cultures, they have a defense in protecting themselves by building up this mindset of don't mess with me because we can do the thing to you. And if they actually believe it, if I put a curse on you, and you actually believe it, and then you go out there and get in a car accident, then your brain's going to go, see, it's because he put a curse on.
But you're describing psychology, not necessarily magic.
Psychology plays a lot into magic. It's the power of belief that changes the energy.
Okay, so for example, I could have actually put myself in a car accident because of the curse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it was me who ended up in the car accident. It wasn't like fate or the universe. Like I almost drove poorly or something.
Right. And
Okay.
a car accident isn't, if you think of it more like I put a curse on you that your relationships at work are going to go bad, and you believe in that, then you can start sabotaging those relationships because you think someone's going to hurt you. So you start withdrawing a little bit, and they're wanting to know what happens with the relationship.
Ah, see, I think a lot of the fear comes from the idea that you have access to the universe in a way that other people don't. And then you're going to conspire with the universe to make horrible things happen to me rather than that we're both playing with a part of an energy that is affecting my life because of the push between us.
Absolutely. It's like inhaling and exhaling oxygen. We're constantly breathing the energy of our environment. So what we do affects the environment around us and affects the people around us. So innately, magic is taking that communication back and forth and using it to alter the environment around us. When I go home, I can work to be a good husband and put out that kind of energy into my environment and help improve it. That's a form of magic, even if it's not sitting there doing a formalized spell or something along those lines.
Oh, I love that. That's so much more accessible too. Because I think a lot of people believe in energy. I mean, you hear that all the time. I don't think they associate it like magic and these practices with just consciously forming the energy more. So, yeah,
So where we
makes it
get
feel
to
safer.
where we get things like rituals is rituals help people get their mindset into the right place to do the energy work. If you and I do a ceremony to help relieve the strains in your life or to help you get over a bad breakup, by going through it, it helps you innately release the pains and traumas of what you're going through, and so you will heal more. Not because some cosmic being is forcing that change upon you, but because you are allowing yourself to heal something, you're giving yourself permission to do something.
Wow. So it's actually very empowering for each person rather than taking it away. Yeah. Another one of my fears, which is sort of related with what you just said, is an actual fear of mine, is that I am very open to energies and experiences and etc. And I think when I was younger, I didn't perceive how vast the world was, or sort of grew up in the binary of good and evil. And so if it wasn't what I had been taught evil would look like, I kind of thought that it was safe. But I guess the reverse is true in that the things that fell under the category of what's evil, I struggle to have a really like positive affirmative relationship with at times. I say all of that to say I had two experiences with entities that I was aware of. One of them was I tried to do this decording thing. I had someone do this decording thing. She did not, I don't think she had a lot of mastery over her practice. She did some kind of like, felt like open heart surgery thing on me, sent me home. I slept for like almost 3 days or something. And I kept seeing things, and it just felt like my actual chest was open. And then for years I would like wake up and see something in the room, and she was like, put yourself in a blue egg. And I found it upsetting and scary. I don't know if that's because of what I was bringing to the table about how to interpret that. And then the other time was when I went to one of the places we have here. It felt really chaotic in there. Like there were just so many people, so many entities, and they all had their own sort of ambitions and feelings and all of that. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many of you. And I think they could tell that I'm like open and malleable and like interested. And so I felt overwhelmed by that. And then when I came home, it felt like I had opened a portal. I suddenly saw all of them everywhere or something. I was like overwhelmed. I do have some mental health stuff that I was afraid I was on the border of. And it was overwhelming. So I just was like, you know what, guys? Thank you. I love that you exist, but I'm going to be monogamous to the universe in how I feel. And I don't really want to participate in this almost what felt like a polyamorous experience with all these people. And I was like, I'm going to close the portal. And I put salt around and things like that. But I think for me, I don't know, nobody teaches you how to interact with other entities. I don't know if these are all things I had in my head that I created. Like, I don't know what I was experiencing, but my fear was that they would feed me thoughts or do things, or they were giving me messages, or there was all this stuff and I couldn't manage communication or boundaries.
So when you said goodbye to them and all that, did it stop?
It did.
A lot of it ties into that thought and that belief system with how things are supposed to be there. So by going through what you did with her, there's obviously some sort of miscommunication there between you and her, where she was not picking up what you were putting down and vice versa, which is why it felt so disruptive to you. It's like two people speaking different languages trying to understand each other. You know, didn't have a good connection there. And so within yourself, a lot of times you can start manifesting. You can start having these images of what is out there and you can start creating it. Or you might have actually drawn the attention of something that exists on the spiritual level and it could have been interacting with you. But by closing that, you can help close yourself off from that as well. Because that's a form of willpower work.
Okay, so I mean, quite literally, and I have heard this before, but like, and I mean, they even have this belief in Christianity and in the movies, the power of Christ compels you, kind of a thing. But like, where it's like if you don't want it in, and you tell it to go away. But also, this is approaching every spirit as if it is negative.
By all means, not every spirit out there is negative or positive. They are just like humanity in that there's a wide range of thoughts and a wide range of emotions, different viewpoints, and everything else like that. So it comes down to your interactions with individual things. Whether we're talking about spirits or people, most of us out there are not innately 100% evil or innately 100% good. There's things that are important to us that we try and focus on and we try and help. And so innately, when you're working with spirits, it's trying to figure out what's important to them and what your part in that is and how y'all can work together to achieve that end.
Are they more powerful than you?
That really depends on the individual spirit.
Okay.
The more people that put belief into a thing, the more energy they put into it and the more it empowers it. So, like here in America, a lot of people put thought and power into the concept of Jesus and God. And so, in turn, a lot of energy is going into that. It's a very powerful concept. If I went out there and I was like, I'm going to go debunk Jesus, it's not going to affect anything because that's way more powerful than the thought and power I can put into something.
Yeah.
If it's something that someone off the street corner came up with, it's very easy to work around that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole different power scale there between things.
And are we the ones that create these entities?
A lot of times. There's a lot of beings exist purely as energy in the world without our influence whatsoever.
Okay.
But a lot of it is manifest by humans.
Okay.
If you moved into a place and you thought it was haunted, and so you kept looking out for the spirits of the ghosts to haunt you, you're going to start hearing every single creak in that house, and you're going to start thinking that's a ghost. And the more you do that, the more that becomes a reality for you. The more that becomes a reality for you, the more it becomes an actual part of reality.
And that to the point in which if someone walked in the room afterwards, they might feel it there. Okay.
It's a lot of the same way with if, for a lot of people that grew up thinking that they were empathic or feel that they're empathic. When you walk into a room after two people get in a fight, you can still pick up that energy that somebody else has put out.
Yeah. So, okay, so not to ruin anyone's time on a Savannah ghost tour, but when you walk into a hotel or something and it feels spooky and you feel like you can feel presences and whatever, or like the lights thing that people talk about where the lights flicker and all that, that might not be Dorothy who died in her bed from insanity. That might be what the last tourist thought that Dorothy was like.
It absolutely could be. It could also be that you're manifesting that. Contrarily, it also could be someone's energy from when they were alive that's still around, that's still caught up in that same pattern. So it really could be Dorothy too. Or it could be something you're manifesting yourself.
Okay. I have to ask you now, with like ghosts, with leftover energy of somebody. Okay. So a lot of people think that it's like the soul, but from a pagan perspective, you're saying it's just like, I'm a ball of all these different energies and a few of them are still here. Where did the other ones go? Are there beliefs around that?
So the easiest way I can describe it myself, because everybody has their own thoughts and opinions and perspectives. How magic's going to work for somebody else that you sit there and interview is going to work completely different than my mindset. But for me, the way I like to think about it is the energy is the part of us that is not physically human and physically here in this world. So with people that have unfinished business, that have something that they're still obsessed with, they're still holding on to, the body can die, but that energy, that thought, that emotion, that consciousness can still stick around.
Okay, so then this leads me into a priest thing, because a lot of times people will help someone let that go so they can rest in peace or whatever. And I wonder if that's part of it. You had a question that was, what do I think priesthood means, right? Or what is, and it was interesting because Armando and I had some coffee and hung out for a long time. We chatted and he kind of did his work on me, just quite naturally. And I realized some really important things. So the way that I would define it from that experience is similar to any priest or pastor or therapist, where you have some spiritual awareness and experience, or there's a practice that is somewhat applied to, and with a psychologist, it would be the knowledge of psychology that is applied to the interaction and the conversation and the investigation. But the primary thing is to get me to know myself, to be freer, to be more fulfilled, to resolve unresolved questions, and to just kind of come to a higher place. That's what I got out of our experience. So I would love to know what your real.
So, as far as what it means to be a priest or priestess, innately is the ability for people to view you as such. I can say I'm a priest all day long, but if nobody believes me, I'm not doing any of that work. It's by actually working with people to do the things that you're trying to do and get them to have that belief to follow you makes you a priest. Because being a priest or priestess is innately looking after your group of people. So from my perspective, personally, I have a lot of background studying psychology, not formally, but through working with people and things like that. So for mine, a lot of it is sitting down with people and talking out their life, figuring out what's going on with them and how I can best help them get through the obstacles in their life, whether it's of a magical nature, whether it's of a spiritual nature, whether it's just trying to come to terms with their relationship with the divine. It's working with individuals to help take care of them. But the next priest over could have a completely different focus for their craft, for their life, a completely different focus for their priesthood or priestesshood. So it's innately finding the gifts and abilities within yourself and figuring out how to serve others with it.
And those gifts a lot of them would be working with entities and kind of having mastered a relationship with an entity?
If that's a basis for your skills, yes. Not everybody's going to have that skill.
Okay. So how would that look with somebody who doesn't have any relationships?
So, a lot of times with people, for me, I don't do a lot of work with spirits perspective.
Mhm.
Mine is sitting down with a lot of people and figuring out what's going on with their life. I
Mhm.
do a lot of work that I call the alchemy of self. The
Mm.
alchemy of self is the idea that you are innately changeable and mutable based on your perceptions of yourself. So we work to figure out who it is you want to be and
Mm.
what's preventing you from taking those steps to do what it is and be who it is you want to be. And then we work to change that so that you can become the person that you want to be.
Wow, that's so interesting because I would say that a lot of what really was amazing to me about the experience was how well, and I found myself wanting to ask him questions like, what do you think of me in this area, or what's your perception of me? I think I asked you, how lesbian do I seem to you? And that's what got us started, I think. But you read me well, like where I'm at. You read parts of who I am that like I know, but I don't even know necessarily are named or are a part of describing an experience or my way of being in the world. You seemed to pick up on them, and I like wanted to get your opinion on things. Then we talked about a relationship situation. That was an interesting journey because you were asking me like a regular person,
Mhm,
asking me questions to learn more about the situation. Those seemed definitely both intuitive and psychology driven, right? Like
mhm,
knowledge about relationships, things like that. Um, but then truly it entered like the magic place where it felt like you saw something that I don't think could have really been inferred
mhm.
from just the questions you were asking.
So again, that comes into the um, being a part of your environment and constantly putting out and picking up energy. By sitting there talking to you, began to open up a little bit about yourself, putting out a certain energy into the environment. As someone that's very empathic, I can start picking up and reading that and feeling what you feel with that. And using that, I can help us come to a mutual place of understanding to help maybe make you think, or help you think something that you wouldn't have necessarily thought before on that.
Mm. Mhm.
So it's about that connection with energy. So for me, that's my form of magic. For
Yeah.
some people, they have to get a spell book and they have to say magic words in a certain way and hold a certain tool a certain way. And if that makes it work in their mind, then that is magic and then it works. But it doesn't require any of that.
Would a fortune teller, what are your feelings about that? Because I know some people who do really amazing work. Specifically, I really appreciate people who do like tarot readings, who are really good at it and who are really
Mhm,
connected and do a lot of really, I was thinking they're really doing a lot of what you described, which is they're picking up and reading your energy in the present and things
mhm,
like that. Now, the thing about, so people will often say with tarot that the tarot cards can't tell you what's to be exactly,
mhm,
but they can tell you kind of what's going on now, maybe what's likely, what's whatever. So, fortune tellers, do you think that there is commonly people are taking advantage of what you just described, and let's say you would take it one step further and say, Rebecca, this relationship is really not going to work out for you. I know that for sure. And you need to get out now, rather than maybe an intuition like, that's not a fit. If that was what you were reading, it would be like, okay, now pay me $300.
There's certainly a group out there that is more performative in nature, that is not innately there to help people get to a good place. They're there to make some money and sometimes a lot of money off of it. That's certainly out there. Ironically, they're using their gifts to do that. They're picking up on what someone's putting out energetically, what emotions, what everything like that is. to help them feel what they want them to feel.
So they might not need to be a charlatan to be taking advantage.
Right. So a lot of those people are charlatans, but to do it is not innately charlatan. There's plenty of people that are into divination magic, which is the form of magic, like astrology, like tarot, like everything else like that, that helps predict the future. And I say that everybody thinks it's like this card says in 4 days you're going to get a horrible car accident and die. It doesn't work that way. Usually with forms of divination, it has to deal with symbols. And symbols have certain meanings and certain values. And so in doing divination, we're presenting these symbols, and it helps you come to a place of understanding in your own life. It gives you context and perspective to help you figure out what that means so you can make the decisions in your own life.
So you're saying that like a symbol could be like an omen in a sense, it could act as, that would say this thing might end in what feels like death, or this thing is, and that's kind of almost like a sure bet that it's going to go in that flavor of direction.
I don't think any of it's a sure bet. That's my perspective as someone who doesn't do a lot of divination. But it's much more from what I've seen and observed with others along the context of someone's coming and asking how their new job's going to go. And something in the reading might say, look out for someone trying to take an advantage. So they start to look out for that more. And so because they're on the lookout for that more, it might help avoid that. It might help them to course correct to avoid a certain thing. Or the power of belief, it might turn into exactly what they're trying to manifest. And then they go, see, the cards told me that they told me that Bobby's going to screw me over at work. When the cards just said, be careful of someone trying to take advantage. So they help give context to your brain at a certain subcontextual level to help you interpret the world around you.
Do you have more questions that feel like burning questions?
So what do you think my biggest fear is coming into paganism, where we've discussed yours? What do you think my relationship with that was?
I think maybe being afraid of doing it wrong and causing problems. These are all random guesses, by the way. The reason I guess that is because I feel a sense of empathy and responsibility in you. I know that you take responsibility for the people in your life, for yourself. So I would imagine that would come with it, of recognizing, okay, I think I'm going to have the power to affect situations significantly. A fear would be messing that up unknowingly. I don't know. You did, spoiler alert, mention to me earlier that you had also been raised Christian. So I would assume you had some similar things to me of what this evil thing is. But yeah, that's all I got.
For the first part of that came more as I grew into an adult. I was still rather young when I got involved. I was 20 years old, so I didn't. Most people at that age group don't have, at least at that point in time, had as much of that concern going on. I had more self-confidence. I know I'm going to make the right decisions, kind of thing. But I was coming from a very strongly Christian background. I was going to be a priest. That was my goal for many years.
Priest.
Yes, in the Episcopal Church. That was my goal for many years of my life. And so there was a certain level of fear about turning your back on God and what God would think and everything like that. But as things came about in time, I learned much more the perspective that the divine simply is around us. We put different faces on what the divine is. We say God works this way or God works that way. The divine itself innately is deeper than what we can as individuals understand. the way I try and look at it is it's like fish in a fish tank trying to look out on our world and trying to understand what it means to be human. They're just not equipped enough. They don't have the depth to have that understanding. For me, the divine is something that is not defined by a single path or a single religion. It's something that we all affect and affects all of us as well. So it actually was able to bring me to a place closer to the divine based off of my own relationship versus what somebody in a church told me God should be like.
Wow. That's not to take away from your experience, but I just had an episode with somebody who was talking about psychedelics, and she was saying it brought her closer to God. And I actually really did not perceive that about paganism in terms of the divine, that feeling of, right, the divine or the oneness. And I think most people would think that it's, well, this was something we talked about before, was like Satanism versus paganism and what the differences are. Now, in my understanding, Satanism is actually people who are very much in the sort of Christian binary, but just worship Satan. So it has nothing to do with magic. It has nothing to do with these pagan practices. It's just literally just worshiping Satan.
Somewhat. There is some people that actually do believe in Satan and follow them. There's just a very small group of that. But actually, most Satanists in the Satanic Church itself and all that is a completely different group, but has nothing to do with the worship of Satan whatsoever. But
Oh,
Satan is an innately Christian context. It's just something that didn't come up in the old religions.
yeah.
And so it's just not really a part of what it's about in the first place. It's one of the things that's imposed by media, by TV, by certain religious leaders and things like that.
So, not to get too far off topic, but can you give us a quick definition then of what Satanists are about?
So you'd really have to talk to a Satanist to
Yeah.
get more details on it. This is much more of an outsider's perspective on it. But usually it's about self-liberty and not letting any one Christian take control and try and dictate how things will be for everybody else. So, in their view, they're much more along the lines of what we might consider freedom fighters,
Yeah.
trying to make sure that nobody has a hand in trying to control everything, is
They're
my
almost like
perspective.
spiritual libertarians.
That's not a bad way of putting it, actually.
So that a Satanist could very much have a relationship with like almost like a monotheistic God, but just want to own it themselves.
Absolutely. I've found that most Satanists I've met are atheistic, but I've only met two.
Yeah.
And I've been doing the craft for 17 years now. It's really just its own circle in its own life, but people throw the two together all the time.
Yeah. I think that really, I mean, the combination of the two, especially with the word Satan, really gets that like scary horror film.
Mhm.
All of these things are like dark magic kind of a thing or whatever. Whereas I know that does exist.
Mhm.
But that's actually a very, very small piece of, and is also misunderstood of all these experiences.
So that leads me to two different places. The first is that magic is innately not good or evil or anything else like that. It's a tool to be used. So just like a hammer can be used for good. I can pick up a hammer and I can join and help build someone a house with Habitat for Humanity and do good in the world. I can also take that hammer and go next door and cave in somebody's kneecap and ruin their life with it. Neither one makes the hammer good or evil. It's the person wielding it that does the good or does the bad. The second part that takes me to is it's not even just the modern context that people were throwing Satanism and paganism together. You see, when Christianity came, they got established so much because they integrated with the local cultures and began turning them a little bit more Christian one part at a time. They did that by taking the old figures and starting to demonize them. They started to take the local gods and turn them into something that was against God, the Christian God. And so that's a very historic practice. And so what we're saying is the after effects of that hundreds of years later.
Yeah, so all along the way, things were getting demonized and then collected in almost this big bag of scary stuff.
Mm-hmm. But innately, what it comes down to is finding your own stability in life and figuring out how you can affect the world around you in a positive and influential way to help grow and help the people around you promote.
Unless you have any more questions, I think that's the perfect way to end.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.